In fact, you did very well with your time. Okay, thank you. We have about 7 minutes for questions, and let's try to pull as many of them together as we can to save time. Please. I think it was extremely clear, the whole thing.
I think everyone's so exhausted.
Well, just a quick one, because you said that the grid is not working in theory. So is it really still so complex, and is it then a real problem for upscaling the whole thing, or do you think you will solve that in time?
Should we collect all, then I'll go through?
Thank you very much, Daniel. Excellent presentation. My question is, what has been successful so far to date in California? What are the real-life possibilities of scalability and exportation of what has happened to date so far in California to other states, as well as to other subnationals, provinces, as well as other nations, given that, and I know there's without a doubt, and I concur that we can have a better economic metric, a different type of methodology to measure GDP, but for a lack of a better measurement as of today, California being the 6th largest GDP, what can we do is it scalable to export what has happened successfully in California to other nation states?
Go ahead now.
Oh, I thought we had, okay. Just
Is the third one?
Okay. So on the group,
Go ahead.
do you want to add these two in?
Of my point earlier really about the investment in efficiency versus the investment in new capacity to generate electricity. Obviously, it's very important to move towards renewables, but I wonder if you have a view, for example, obviously it's context specific, but in the context of California, how do you see the balance between investing in more energy efficiency and the balance between investing in more electricity generation?
Dan, a great presentation. Just one question. How are we doing at documenting the health benefits that are flowing from the energy conversion? We've all seen a few papers, but have we told the story well enough? Have we documented carefully enough the health benefits that flow?
Okay, let me jump into the... It works in theory, but not in practice. What I meant is that we can model the system as a bunch of generators, and those generators can be power plants, fossil or renewable, and also negawatts, the ways that we save. And we can bundle that and understand that. And then we can transmit that around with the transmission system. But what we cannot model is the distribution. It is too complex, too idiosyncratic, too detailed. And country after country have started and then not finished it because of the need for a massive new generation of sensors. And actually the country with the best progress in installing smart sensors and smart meters in the world is Italy. Italy also has, at least by the data from August, the highest rate of that data not being recorded or saved anywhere. And so it is a mixture of a data and a computational challenge, and the grid system is complex to model because you actually can't do what we like to do analytically, which is parallelize the calculations. Because if you want to look what you're going to get to down the line, you actually need to finish the calculation at one stage before you move forward in time. And so it's been a problem on a computer science basis. It's very it's very non-amenable to things that we do in many other areas. So we're getting better at the approximations, but we still don't model it in detail. Oh, okay.
Now, thank you for your extremely interesting talk. I'd like to comment on the cook stove story, which is relevant for hundreds of millions of poor people and women in particular. Recent work done at my institute and at other centers looking across West and East Africa seem to suggest that one project after the other. One NGO pushing another cook stove, thereby never permitting a market to come about, and lack of sustainability and a mess, pretty much. Now, you sounded rather positive. Can you elaborate a bit? And my impression is it's a sad story which requires a totally new approach.
Okay. Let me take, I'll get the others first, and I'll come back to...
Before you answer that, he reminded me he also had a question. It was my fault in both those. Go ahead.
Okay.
Shortly, I think, so we know that electricity will be clean and we'll find ways to store it. Developing countries have the issue that you have increased driving, and so the developed countries world is you will reduce your emissions if you go to EV, but it's not the same story for developing countries that don't have the full use of cars. What would you recommend for the transition before we go all out electric 20 years down the line?
Okay. Okay. So jumping back in the order of these, are great questions. This issue about what do we think can scale from the California and other stories. I think the biggest feature is actually the one that I kind of tried to highlight, and Jeff really called attention to, and that is that the most vital thing, given we know every place will do it differently, is having a plan and figuring out how strategy in agriculture impacts strategy and efficiency, and how the financial system is going to get integrated. And thinking that through, I think, is actually the most important feature. You can argue that the Energiewende in Germany and in California both have that feature in different ways, that there is an overall part of the plan. The most concrete version of what the senator is asking about, though, is really that California's plan has already developed foreign partners, if you will. Ontario and Quebec are formally part of the carbon market. There's a discussion now about potentially expanding that. Chiapas and and Acre in Brazil are both members of this as well. And there's been discussions going on now, and you would know more than I, but I'm hoping that the head of our climate process, Mary Nichols, a recycled head of the climate process, I have to say, just like our governor, recycled, is something where we will be able to expand that network of partners. I do think that if you don't measure it and quantify it, even if those measures are far from perfect, you're not going to do it right. And so having a price of carbon, but moving directly to this discussion where California is very active about a social cost of carbon, those are really the ways to capture a wider set of benefits. And so the question about health benefits, no, I don't think we've done anywhere near a good enough job. I think it's part of this crosstalk we heard here, and the really incredible comment that we heard yesterday about such a small fraction of the money in the health sector being spent on preventative, public health, environmental. That's a travesty. And I really think, I mean, my wife's a physician, we talk about this all the time at home. I really think we have collectively no excuse for not having found multiple metrics to argue for that shift. We can blame big pharma, we can blame all these folks, but ultimately these things reside at our own doorsteps. And in the same way that I did my resignation, I would urge people on committees that think they can leverage the process to say, I'm not putting up with this blank any longer if we don't find a way to use good metrics to make the case. The other feature which came out of Senator De Leon's comment is this efficiency. California has two elements that have been very controversial that have done a huge job. One is that in California, energy efficiency is now seen equally as an asset as green generation. In fact, before you can get a permit to install any kind of power plant, renewable or fossil, you must demonstrate to the Utility Commission that you have gone through a progression called the loading order, where you examine the opportunity for efficiency first. Only when you do that can you look at solar or wind or other things. Only when you do that and you find you've exhausted them all, which is basically impossible, can you even get a permit to consider a natural gas plant, and coal is off the table entirely. So that sort of process, and a more technical thing called decoupling, which I won't go into here, a very controversial policy, but one that has transformed the sector, has been hugely valuable in doing this. To the last question, this issue about cook stoves, obviously I won't answer it fully in this system here, but I actually think, I do think the story is positive. I think that what you highlighted is the problem, and that is we've had too many unconnected do-gooder NGO groups with a stove they designed with foundation money, and that foundation had no interest or ability or whatever to rein them in. We have examples of NGOs. I won't mention the group. It's in Sweden, supported by CETA, and they were given money to go buy up all the charcoal in a southern African country I won't mention, Malawi, and they put the charcoal under a tarp to try to hold it from one season to the next. Well, a leaky tarp on charcoal means it all turned to ash. So their well-funded NGO government effort actually turned a year's supply of charcoal into dust. And so we do it wrong often, but I would say the places that have thought it through did it right. For all of its troubles on this issue, Kenya's Improved Stove Program has reached over 50% of all urban dwellers and roughly 25% of the rural community. And we've demonstrated, and other groups have demonstrated, the savings in these communities. Now, there was this recent large study that got a lot of attention, and I think someone mentioned yesterday the very fundamental flaw, and I wish it had been reported more, and that is they took stoves that were essentially trivially different versions with incredibly similar emissions profiles. Well, you saw on the graph I showed here, we have stoves that are fully 50 or 75% different. If you kind of gild the lily and look at stoves that are basically different because of one paint job versus another, it should be little surprise that users didn't see much difference. And so where people have done it carefully, and I don't think that NGOs and foundations without government involvement can really do it carefully. Kenya started out with a white paper, and I know that because we wrote the draft white paper, and Kenya used it to push an urban program first, and then a rural program, and I would say that that is one of the few examples. China being the other one, where 120 million improved cook stoves were pushed through in a process where Kirk Smith and other groups have and colleagues have really demonstrated the health benefits. So I do think you can find disasters, but I think this is one of the few cases where looking at those successes and who was involved in them really makes a difference in getting it out there.
Thanks a lot, and I thank all the speakers. I mean, we recovered quite a bit of time. It's now coffee break. One question for the organizers. Should we cut the coffee break from 15 to 10 minutes? And then we will only be 15 minutes late. And if not,